Welcome, everyone. We have a fabulous show today. We have a thought leader with us. Her name is Laurie Demeritt. She is the owner and chief executive officer at the Hartman Group. It is a consumer culture consultancy. That's a tongue tieler, but she is something else, an expert in the food industry. I have never met anybody with the insights that she has and the research that she has done. Demand side trends in the food and beverage industry. That's what she focuses on. She has more than 20 years in experience in consumer behavior and culture, and we're going to learn a lot from her today. She has some terrific slides, which we're going to share with you, and I am so glad that you're here with us for this really fascinating show. I'm Lorraine Siegel. I'm the founder, CEO, and chair of the Exceptional Women Awardees Foundation. We enable high-level women to reach their dreams. Why did I start this foundation? Well, I never had a mentor. All throughout my early years as a lawyer and then as a CEO of multiple companies, I never had a guide to help me on my way. And I wanted to be sure that women who walk the road less traveled would always have a group of supportive women leaders to enable them and guide them on their way. And that's exactly what we do at the Exceptional Women Awardees Foundation. And so we bring to you some thought leaders, sometimes our own EWAs and sometimes others outside the organization. And Laurie Demeritt is one of those. So let me introduce you today to our excellent speaker and expert, Laurie Demeritt. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, I'm just so thrilled to have you with us. Tell us a little bit about you and your organization.
Yes, absolutely. And you said it well, a food culture consultancy, and we're very focused on the end consumer. And really, that's all of us, right? So our food habits, behaviors, how we aspire to do different things with food into the future. And so what we do as an organization is go very deep into those consumer insights. We spend time in consumer homes. And so we're there as they are unpacking their groceries, as they're making dinner, cleaning up after dinner, constantly asking questions about what they're doing and why. We go grocery shopping with them to understand what purchase decisions they're making at the shelf and what's turning them off potentially about products too. We're a pretty small organization. We're under 50 employees, and many of us have worked together for a very long time, and I mean decades together. And so our insight runs deep on consumers, but we also want to be very aware of what's coming tomorrow. And so we do spend a lot of time with those most engaged consumers who are buying really the unique food products out there today, the cricket proteins of the world and the precision fermentation that's creating new protein products. And so we truly want to understand what's on the horizon and how that might then disseminate out to other consumers in the marketplace. So
yes, in there, I want to ask you, literally go back to the beginning. So how did you get into this business? I mean, how did you, were you as a little girl, did you go into people's houses and see what they ate and how they did it?
Well, it's funny that you note that because my father worked in the food industry, and so specifically in the cereal industry. And so I remember as a small girl going into grocery stores with him. And at that time, there weren't a lot of dads shopping the grocery stores. And we would go look at the product sets. We'd go look at the cereal boxes, make sure they were lined up right. And he'd talk to me about food products and habits and behaviors. So I would say that I was always very curious about food, and especially from a marketing angle. So it's perhaps not surprising I ended up in the food industry after all.
I love that. I love that. And so what are some of the big trends in the food industry today, Laurie?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the biggest trends, just starting at a high level, is how our food behaviors and habits have really changed. If you look back, we used to always be about having 3 square meals a day generations ago, right? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And what's happened over the years is that we've really started to still hold on to that dinner occasion, but breakfast and lunch are almost disintegrating. And what I mean by that is consumers are starting to eat and sort of graze across the full day. So they're having a little something here and a little something there, and they're sort of filling up the hours of the day with little habits. They don't call it snacking necessarily because snacking has some baggage attached to it. But what they're saying is they're having something that's a little nosh, a little bite, a tide me over until they have something more substantial that might look like a meal, or it might just look like they're grazing again. So I think that's one big change, is just the dissolution of a lot of those habits and behaviors from the past.
Well, has that led to an increase in obesity, do you think?
Well, it does to some extent because we are getting a lot of calories these days in our diets. But honestly, a lot of people are eating this way because they think it's a healthier approach. They have the sense that if they're kind of grazing on and off throughout the day, that it's going to monitor their blood sugar levels, their energy levels. And so for many consumers, it's actually a more healthful approach to snacking and to eating in general.
Interesting. I want our audience to please give us some questions. And if you're interested in finding out more about Laurie Demeritt and the Hartman Group, you can see across the bottom of the screen, that is the URL for her company. So you can go there and ask her questions if you want to, but I would prefer you ask her questions here. So please join us on our show. We'd love to hear your questions. So how did COVID affect the food industry and what we eat, Laurie?
Certainly. Well, one of the things that COVID has done is made us much more focused on our personal health. And so there were a lot of health and wellness behaviors that were bubbling up even prior to COVID, obviously, but it's really made us focus on what's right for us as individuals. And so one of the things we're finding is there's just a lot of exploration going on with food approaches and habits. And in fact, I have a slide or two that I'd love to share with you to that extent there. If we can go back one slide. Great. And so what this is showing here is the number of us as consumers, these are adult consumers in the US, who have experimented with a diet or an eating approach in the past year. And you can see there it's well over half of us. And if you look at the different generational groups, you can see that younger cohorts are even more likely than older cohorts to be experimenting with all these diets and eating approaches. So if we look at the next slide, and I know there's a lot going on this slide, but I want to really bring this to life, which is to say that there's just so many ways out there that we're exploring with our eating. And so what COVID has done is we've thought more about our health and wellness and thought more about what we're putting to our bodies. People are doing a lot of experimentation with everything from intermittent fasting, which I'm sure many of us have heard about, to low carb diets, to keto focused. And so I know that probably many of us who are listening to this today have tried these. And what we're finding is people are kind of picking and choosing pieces of these that work for them and then bringing them together and kind of constructing their own approach. And that's definitely something that COVID's brought into new focus within the past few years.
Well, I guess that's an opportunity for people in the food industry to create completely different food experiences, but also, I would say, for the traditional restaurant chains that do breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I know I've seen breakfast all day and not so much lunch or dinner all day. How have they adapted to that kind of disintegration, really, of the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are people who are doing it well and people who aren't doing it so well. So one thing we would say is you do not want to chase any of these diets because there's so many of them and so few people are doing each. What we think is done well is when you think about what are the commonalities that a lot of these approaches have, and you really land on two things. One is more protein, and the second is less sugar. And so as we think about marketing to consumers, whether you're a restaurant or a manufacturer of a product or anyone speaking about food, this desire for all things protein, which really seems to be the miracle ingredient for most consumers, and this avoidance of sugar as it's become almost a demonized ingredient in our society are some of the commonalities. So we'd say marketing around those approaches makes a lot of sense.
But then when you look at the fact that people are still eating ice cream, and in fact they're going for the richer ice creams, not necessarily the yogurt kind of ice cream, and they're indulging themselves in small pleasures which are very, very high sugar, high fat. How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, absolutely. We found that emotional and even almost a spiritual connection to wellness is sometimes found through indulgence. And so we find that upwards of 65% of consumers say that indulgence absolutely has a place in their health and wellness approach. And so as we've matured as a society and we're no longer thinking about health and wellness just being about the physicality of being well, it's also about mental and emotional balance. And so consumers say, you know, there are going to be those times where they really indulge in something that's high in sugar, high in calories, but that's part of their approach to wellness. And I think what we're finding is there's categories that really consumers want us to be hands off of, right? We see that return to that full fat ice cream, other dairy products where consumers say, when I'm going to indulge, I really want to do it and make sure it counts. And so indulgence has absolutely been a part of now our health and wellness approach. And we're finding that mental health, as we talk to it about consumers, is on par with the physicality of health today.
It's very confusing. It certainly is not linear because there are so many human behavior aspects to this. You know, Laurie, you mentioned something about crickets. I'm reading a lot about crickets as a source of protein. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I think what's colliding there is this desire for more protein along with this consumer desire for more sustainable sources of protein. Most consumers, although most consumers still eat meat and love meat, know that there are some environmental pieces of meat production and cattle production that could be harmful. And so they're looking for new sources of protein, and that's coming in all different types of ways. It's being grown in a lab, it's being manufactured through fermentation, and certainly cricket is one source that consumers are not exactly excited about, I would say, but it is a very sustainable source of protein. It may not be something that is going to be on the plates of all US consumers anytime in the near future, but certainly on a global scale, we see cricket production ramping up because of the sustainability, because of the protein content of cricket. So I think it's just one really interesting example about how things are changing and how consumers are starting to align some of their beliefs and their values around things like sustainability, along with what they want to eat and what's healthful to eat.
Yeah, interesting dynamics going on there. I know we have a couple of questions coming in. I want to take one and then go back to a couple of mine, but I don't want to ignore the audience. So please put in more questions as they come along. So let's see. There's one question that just came up from Kate of San Diego. She is asking you, Laurie, what do you see as the future of food, and how is technology likely to change or improve what we eat?
Yes, certainly technology is starting to play a huge role in what we're eating today. And I was mentioning some of those technologies, but there's many more that are out there today as well. And it's interesting, because as we talk to consumers and they talk about what they want in food products, we hear words a lot like real and fresh and minimal processing. And yet at the same time, there's this really strong consumer embrace of products related to technology too. So it's almost like they're saying two different things, and it speaks to this almost irrationality that you mentioned a minute ago, Laurie. And that's, I want one thing on one day and one thing another day. But technology is being seen as a solve for many of their values. I think it's also very important as we talk about technology and as people are putting products into market, is really being very clear and transparent about why those products are coming to market and why they need technology. What I mean by that is consumers are pretty savvy today about something that might be showing up in the marketplace. They think it's just being done to make more money for the big companies. But if it's being done because it is more sustainable, it's better for consumers, there's benefit to communities, people, animals, consumers are much more likely to embrace that. So being very clear about the narrative and the story is, especially behind products that are produced with technology, is going to be the key to success in having them adopted into their behaviors long term.
I remember when GMA, people called it monster food, was eventually became very popular in Europe and other parts of the world, and everybody would advertise, oh, we don't have any monster stuff in our food, it's only fresh. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, that some of those methodologies really enabled us to expand our food supply for the world.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to GMOs, what we found is that there's huge differences between different consumer groups. And so consumers like myself, Gen Xers and Boomers, still seem to be sort of negative towards GMOs, but we're finding that younger consumers are more open to them, especially if you start looking at consumers under about 25 years of age. Now, one part of that is simply they've grown up with technology, and so they're just much more open to it playing a role, even in the food supply system. But moreover, what we've heard from them is that if they get information on why things like GMOs are being used, if the information's there and there is a benefit to consumers, to humanity, to the world, they're much more open. And so we've really seen, we thought about 5-6 years ago, we were going to see this huge pushback in the US against GMOs, much like we did in Europe and other places. And it sort of mitigated. And part of that was because it seems that there's this more openness to it if it's going to be a solve for something that consumers think is problematic about the food supply system. And many younger consumers today do believe there's problems in terms of those sort of detrimental impact on animals, on humans, on the world. And so they're opening the door a little bit more to GMOs. But again, transparency is really the key there to ensuring that they're going to accept them into their diets.
Interesting. You just have to wait long enough. It's like fashion. It'll eventually it's going to come back into vogue again. There's another question which just came in, which is a very interesting one. I'd like to put that one up. It's from Josh. And he has a very interesting question, which I certainly am sensitive to. What impact has the current economic situation had on consumers when it comes to their food choices? And then, Laurie, just add on a little bit about what's going on with Ukraine and grain there, and if you're seeing any impact on your clients in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first, when it comes to consumers, there is certainly a lot of concern right now. We see that over two-thirds of consumers say that they're very concerned about rising prices in the food space, and they're undertaking a few different strategies. Number one, not surprisingly, is they're looking for more deals. And so seeking out the best place to buy something, be it online or in person, to get that good deal. Number two, they're starting to make some trade offs. And what we mean by that is trade offs maybe not always buying the same that they used to. So they might still buy that organic milk for their kids, but they might not spend the money on the organic broccoli for their husband anymore. So making some trade offs there and pulling back. And we also see trade offs being made just within the category itself. So for the consumer that maybe was always buying the strip loin piece of beef in the past, is now going to try the much more palatable priced top round or some other cut of meat as just one example. And so they are making these trade-offs because they're nervous about pricing. One thing I
Okay.
love that our clients have brought to our attention is that there's a lot of consumers who are not actually undergoing economic stress, and yet they're still trying to be more frugal. And we call this the theatrics of thrift. It's this idea that in this uncertain environment, we should all probably be more conscious of our choices and our fiscal health, even if it's not directly impacting us at the moment.
The theatrics of threat. Wow. You could write a book on that. That is probably an underlying definition of our media approach to everything nowadays is the theatrics of threat. Scary stuff. Well, that is very, very interesting. About Ukraine and the grain issues that are going on there. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly. Our clients have been impacted. The food supply system is seeing a lot of impact of that, especially for some of our clients who are in those, obviously, those grain-based categories. There are being prices that are being passed on to consumers. It's a little uncertain if that's going to be short-term or long-term. And so I think that is one of the things that consumers are aware of. So they're a little bit more open to just understanding that food supply system. And during COVID, they became more aware of how the food system works, right? They saw all these out of stocks. They really questioned domestically how protected our food supply system was. And so I think they're not necessarily panicking in terms of consumers, nor are clients panicking yet. But I think they are starting to think about what are the long-term impacts of this and how can we become a little bit more sustainable as a domestic industry as it relates to food to head off any future concerns.
It's interesting. I bet you didn't realize you'd be in the geopolitical area of
With
the
food.
world dealing with all kinds of issues that come up there. How do your clients use your organization? Is that one of the ways in terms of food shortage or food availability?
Yeah, the primary way they use our services is to help develop new food products. And so much of the work we do is around innovation of things like new ingredients they might want to use, new botanicals or new products in the marketplace. What is the product format? As we are kind of going back to the way things used to be, we're increasingly on the go eating again. So what does that mean from a convenience standpoint? And so we do a lot of work helping them develop products that are going to really align with those consumer needs and aspirations moving into the future. We also do a lot of consumer segmentation, so understanding target consumers for their products, and then certainly the messaging. And that's really important. A lot of the words that we use in the industry, in the food industry, are not consumer friendly. And so really being thoughtful about what is the right way to talk about these products, how is it going to play a role in their lives, in their homes, and getting that language right so they resonate with it when they have that, just that momentary glance at it at the shelf. And they'll start to read about it, maybe think about putting it in their basket or their cart, and then start to bring it into their home long term.
Very interesting. Let's see our next question. And I can see that there are a bunch of questions coming in now. So let's take the next one. Thank you so much, Amy. Farhad from Brooklyn. Do you study culture with reference to food?
Absolutely. Yeah. Culture is a big part of what we do. And it's important because food is starting to help define who we are. And so, what I mean by that is we probably all know these people, right? In our social networks, they're like the new mom that says, my kid would never eat at McDonald's. They love having smoked salmon instead. And so, saying something like that is almost like espousing your values around food, and it's making a moral statement about who you are. And so food increasingly is becoming a way that helps us express our self-identity. It's a way of telling the world who we are and what we care about. And so understanding all those, as we call them, cultural apparatus out there, all these snippets around food, all these aspirations around food, all these morals and values that are tied into food is a very important part of understanding what is the food landscape going to look like. It's not as easy as it was, a few generations ago where it was just about sustenance and satiety, it now has to mean something. So there's a burden on food increasingly to play that role in consumers' lives.
So I know we haven't discussed this before, but I was just wondering if you've seen a trend in uptick in gluten-free demand.
Certainly, yeah, that's been a trend that we've been following for quite a while. And I think, interestingly, gluten-free has come to be symbolic of other goals that consumers have. And what I mean by that is only, less than 1% of the population really has celiac disease or has been diagnosed with celiac, which would ensure they need to eat gluten-free. But gluten-free has become something that many people feel like is important to their overall diet. They feel they might not be, allergic to gluten per se, but might have a sensitivity to it. We also see a lot of consumers who are using it as a symbol of a product being fresh, real, clean, less processed, less stuff in it. So those things I was talking about earlier. And so gluten-free is almost like a symbol of something that might be a little bit cleaner and a little bit healthier. And that's why we see such huge participation in the marketplace, not just for those folks who have been medically diagnosed with celiac disease, but for all those consumers who are seeking something that they believe is healthier or better for you. Much in the same way we see things like organic playing that role.
Organic too, but Laurie, it's interesting. Many gluten-free products have a ton of chemicals in them. They're actually not fresher and they're not better for you, but they've got that sort of the correctness about them.
Yeah, they've got that vibe to them. I think we're seeing that in plant-based too. Plant-based has seen a lot of growth in the last few years, and consumers have increasingly thought, it's healthier, better for you, none of the bad stuff. But there's an Achilles heel to a lot of those plant-based products, and for gluten-free is that they're actually not as clean if consumers really understand what's in them. And so we're starting to see a little bit of a reckoning in the plant-based space specifically, which has seen such exponential growth, that consumers are starting to do more of the flipping over, the reading of the labels, understanding, when they see something in the ingredients that has an X, a Y, or a Z in it, they immediately think that must be a chemical. So as they now become a little bit savvier and more knowledgeable about some of these certifications and claims, I think we're starting to see a little bit of blowback to those products that aren't as clean and as less processed as consumers would like.
Yeah. And almond milk, for example, which has been very popular, is actually not good for the environment because it uses a humongous amount of water, which has become one of our scarcest resources. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, water mitigation, water management certainly is becoming more top of mind for consumers. It's sort of under the umbrella concept right now of regenerative agriculture, which for a lot of consumers is where organic is headed. So being thoughtful about not just not using pesticides or herbicides, but really thinking about, the water management, soil fertility and soil health is a part of regen ag. And so it's not necessarily an issue yet that's top of mind for consumers, but we see it starting to grow with those most engaged consumers who are the ones who are the most knowledgeable and the most savvy. So as regenerative agriculture starts to take off and that really focuses on things like soil health and water management, those will start to be things that are much more top of mind for consumers. And I think certainly almonds are one of the industries domestically that might suffer as that knowledge base grows amongst consumers.
Yeah, well, certainly in California, we are so short of water here that although it's drizzling a little bit today, it is so unusual for us. And it's definitely top of mind for everybody who's living in California. So hopefully that will set the trend for the future of water management for the rest of the country. Laurie, I know you have amazing slides. Are there a couple that you'd like to share with us that we haven't seen yet?
What I'd love to share is on cooking. And we haven't really touched on cooking, but certainly as we talk about the changes that consumers are going through, right? This one here. I think what's really interesting is there's sort of this bad rap for cooking, right? That food industry, people say, oh, no one really likes cooking. Everyone likes convenience. But what we're finding is that over half of us really sort of enjoy cooking, if not love it. And that over indexes to younger consumers. And so some of the skills and the techniques that younger consumers especially picked up during COVID are going to stick with them. We are going back to food service. We are cutting down on the amount of time we're preparing food now that we can. But there's this general embrace and like around cooking. And I think especially as we talk about tomorrow's consumers, right? 25 and under crowd today, there really is a lot of love for cooking. They want to use more techniques and more learnings. But that said, I had to include these quotes on this slide because I just love the millennial who says, I can't figure out what to make for dinner. And sometimes I just sit down and think, I'm going to have to do this every day for the rest of my life. So I think our insight here is really balancing that desire to get creative in the kitchen and to cook something, but also let's give them some shortcuts and some convenience items so they don't have to spend hours in the kitchen cooking what they want to eat.
And now you're seeing the growth of these food services that give you almost cooked food so that you can have the vision of being the cook in the kitchen, but actually what you're doing is taking everything they've given you and putting it in a frying pan or a pot. But it is at least semi-fresh, and I think they're growing. What is your perspective? Mine is just a layperson's one. What's your research tell you about food services?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that I just have to do a little bit at home, and putting it into a skillet and just sort of pushing around with a spatula is some consumers' definition of scratch cooking today. And so I think that's exactly what we mean. Now, sometimes what consumers will do is get a little creative, right? So they'll put a little extra sauce on it or some spices they like, or substitute a different, meat or protein source in. And so there is some creativity going on. But the sweet spot for manufacturers is truly giving them those shortcuts, the stuff they don't want to do. It's almost like we're being their sous chef and doing all the chopping and slicing and dicing, and then giving it to them in a package that seems really fresh, right? So it's no longer kind of the microwavable entree of yesteryear. It's something that seems very fresh and very real. They can get a little bit creative with it, but still get dinner on plates within 20 minutes.
And food equals love, really, in many ways, in many cultures. So at least you as a food preparer for your family, and many men, I think, are cooking now who never used to cook before, because it is a symbol of your being able to take care of your family. Do you see that there's an increase in men over what it was in the past?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've definitely seen that. I think men making the shopping decisions, doing the shopping, doing the cooking, used to be just the cleanup, and now they're more equally sharing responsibilities across the household. And certainly we do find that food equals love ultimately, right? That satisfaction that you can get by giving someone something that they like, enjoy, and you also feel like it's a little bit healthful. And so that really does, this idea of the ideal meal, we talk about it a lot. We don't always achieve it as consumers, but the ideal meal has a good deal of love as part of it, along with some of those health attributes and other benefits consumers are seeking. But the changing roles and responsibilities in households is amazing. I'll give you one brief stat there I love. It's from the government, and it shows that women today spend 47 minutes less per day preparing meals than they did 50 years ago. Men now do 8 minutes more. So
Wow.
they picked up a little bit of the slack, but not all of it yet.
Yeah, it certainly tells us a lot in that one statistic. Do you have any more slides? I love your slides. They're just so good and so many interesting aspects. Anything else to share with us?
I think we've covered the main things I wanted to knock off. I know we have some more information if people are interested in it, but I feel like we've had a really good breadth of conversation across what I was going to present.
Okay, so that's really where we'll stop with that discussion. But I want to know what's next for you, Laurie. Where will you take this company going forward? Because you're in an incredibly important space.
Yeah, we're lucky in that food, is always going to be there, right? So it's sort of like a built-in long-term sustainability plan. But what we're trying to do at the company is be very intentional about what sort of spaces we want to go into, both in terms of the verticals we go into. So we just work in food and beverage right now, but there's a little bit of room to play there in some of the other health and sustainability spaces. And moreover, being thoughtful about what type of work we want to take on. We do a lot of research work. We'd like to get a little bit more into the strategic consulting space. And so we're exploring some ways to do so, but intentionally staying pretty small as an organization. We really enjoy working with one another. And so that will be something we think about. And, longer term, as I age, thinking about the ownership structure too. So I think there's some exciting potential to have more of our employees be involved in that longer term.
And even looking at the demographic of aging and food and how food relates to aging. Have you done any research on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think as you talk about things like higher quality of life for a longer period of time and vitality into older age, food has a very direct impact for many consumers there. I mean, clearly for conditions that we're dealing with, we might be using, prescription medication and OTC, but food is really seen as this kind of like backup strategy. It's a very proactive way to mitigate any health concerns as we age. And so there's a lot of overlap there in a way that I think is very modern and new and wasn't happening in the past. So seeking out things like products that have cognitive function benefits to guard against, memory loss and staying sharp and staying focused, staying fit, joint management, energy levels throughout the day. There's a lot of really exciting developments going on in the food space. And so certainly we don't want to forget that there is a very wide spectrum of consumers that are seeking health, not just those younger consumers that we tend to talk about more often in many of our day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. And, if you think that you are what you eat, that just kind of says it all, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the way consumers are approaching it today.
Oh, fantastic. Well, look, it's just been such a pleasure having you, Laurie. I certainly want to invite you again, and probably will have you back every year, because I have a feeling these food trends are going to continue to evolve, because information transfer is so fast now that as new things are developed, you're going to be right in the front of making that happen. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, of course, we always have a question for you, and I would like to know, how have your food habits changed throughout and after COVID? And have you gone back to the way you used to eat? I certainly have not, and I'd be very interested to hear how you have changed your life with respect to food. And my email is up on the screen, so please will you email me there. And of course, we always have another show lined up for you. And our next show is going to feature two of our fantastic Exceptional Women awardees. We have Celia Ramos, who's a managing director at Accenture, and Tamara Cora, who's a former vice president of finance at Quantcast, who has reinvented herself. These ladies are going to talk about technology and how they have been able to lead in the technology industries and the finance industries. Very interesting insights we're going to get from them. And of course, I want to be sure that you go to our YouTube channel, and we're going to have a podcast from this show, which is going to be on Amazon Music, Spotify, and Apple. Please look at us on LinkedIn and Meta, whatever your streaming platform happens to be. And of course, give us lots of likes. We like that. We look forward to seeing you next week at our next show. Have a great week, everyone. Bye now.